Everybody, this is Dream. We have a great slate here. It's an 8-game slate here on DraftKings. I think we have a lot of good options. My top teams for stacks are Toronto, Milwaukee, New York Yankees, and Atlanta. Now, the only issue with the Yankees is they're going against Waka, who early in the season was somebody I really like to target when it comes to pitching. But he has been pretty good the last few games, so just remember that when stacking potential Yankees. But overall, I think this slate's really awesome. I think it's going to have a lot of high scoring. We got a lot of good pitching options, and so without further ado, let me go ahead and say thank you guys to the Patreon guys. Really appreciate it. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below in the comments. Make sure to check the description for Discord and for Patreon. And make sure to smash that subscribe button and like this video. And I really appreciate it when you guys do that. So let's go ahead and get into the players themselves today. So first of all, for pitching, we have Justin Verlander. He's averaging 26 fantasy points a game last 10. He's had a really good season so far. He's only had a few bad games. But he has, in his last game against Baltimore, he had 16 fantasy points. So we do have to be a little bit conservative with him today. But overall, he's in a good spot against Baltimore in this particular matchup. And he's had a lot of really good games. The next guy I really like is Shane Bieber. He's probably the most consistent guy lately. He's had 9 of the last 10 games, over 22 fantasy points. And then against Chicago White Sox, he's had 15, 4, 38, and 27 this season. This game is a little bit tougher because he's at the Chicago White Sox. But overall, he's in a good spot here, and I think he's a plus matchup on this particular slate. Then we have Julio Urias, who has only 3 games under 20 fantasy points since 6-1, and his upside here is capped, but he's almost guaranteed a win every time he comes out with the Dodgers. He's only had a couple of games where he didn't get a win, and he doesn't quite get as many Ks, but he also has, he goes pretty deep in the game and tends to get some strikeouts, and so he has some high upside here. And the one game against Arizona, he had 17 fantasy points. I think that's definitely repeatable, and you probably do a little bit better than that this time. And then we look at Brandon Woodruff against Cincinnati. The only real issue here is that this game is being played in Cincinnati. He's had some really good games against them. He's averaging 23 fantasy points, but his one not as great game was against Cincinnati at Cincinnati, and so where he only had 6 fantasy points. So this is a little bit risky because of that, but overall he's a good pitcher in a good spot. And then we'll look at Max Fried against Philadelphia. He's been a little up and down lately, averaging 19 fantasy points a game for the last 10. He's also had 3 games against Philadelphia. 2 of them were really good, but then 1 of them was really bad. So it's just a matter of which version of him you're going to get. But he does get enough strikeouts to make him interesting in this particular matchup. Overall, because you need two pitchers on the slate, it's going to be a little bit difficult to decide which ones you want, but there's just so many good options. We're going to have to pass on Zach Gallen and also on Cueto because they're just in kind of tougher matchups, and same with Ranger Suarez against Atlanta. So with that said, let's go and get into the one more pitcher actually I meant to add who's in an interesting situation is the Chicago Cubs pitcher Hayden Wesneski against Pittsburgh. Now, he's pitched in 3 games this season. He's had 29, 26, and 5 against... obviously, he's had 2 of those games against sub-average teams. But he gets Pittsburgh today, which is very interesting. And in 2 of these games, he had over 7 strikeouts. If he could have a game like this, he's somebody you could potentially use as a cheap option on DraftKings. But it's definitely risky because he's a young player. And it just depends on, how he plays in this particular matchup. But overall, so far this season, he's been really good. Now, his first 3 games were at home. This game's on the road, so that might make a little bit of a difference as well. But overall, he's somebody that you can potentially take a look at as a Hail Mary option. Let's go ahead and get into the catchers. So first of all, we have Will Smith for the Dodgers against Arizona. He's been averaging 6 fantasy points a game. Hasn't been quite as good, but he's still somebody we have to take a look at this position. We have a couple good options today, though, so I don't think he's probably going to be our top choice. Let's go ahead and look at, Kirk. He's in a great spot for Toronto. I really like Toronto today. and he's in a good spot. He's been hitting the ball pretty good. 8.9, 366 last 10. He is kind of due for a home run, though, and he could potentially get it here. Then we have William Contreras for the Atlanta Braves. He's in a great matchup against Suarez, and he's averaging 7.2 the last 10. Now, if these next three play, then they're going to be people that you want to take in consideration, and they're probably in better positions than the top guys, assuming that they do play. And so let's go ahead and look at those guys. Travis d'Arnaud is one for the Braves. He's actually averaging 8.4, 343, including 2 home runs the last 10. And then Danny Jansen for the Toronto. He's been hitting the ball 9.3, 419 the last 10 games, hitting extremely well. I really like him in this particular matchup if he plays. And finally, Austin Barnes. Now, he didn't do good yesterday like we wanted. He only had 2 fantasy points. But he's still averaging 8.8 the last 10, 364. Though I don't think he'll play today. But if he does, then he'll be somebody to roster. So we have plenty of good options at catcher today. That was not the case yesterday so much. At first base, we have Higuera for Milwaukee. Now, he hasn't been hitting the ball quite as well lately, but he does have a plus matchup here against Cincinnati, and I look for some of these, I look for a couple of these Brewers to hit home runs. Josh Naylor is another guy I like for Cleveland, and he's in a good matchup here against Cueto. He's been hitting the ball 7.3 fantasy points a game, and I look for him to have home run potential in this matchup. He's also just absolutely torched the Chicago White Sox this year with 10 fantasy points a game. And then Trey Mancini, he's very boom or bust, but he's in a positive situation today against Baltimore, and I do like him as a potential home run hit threat today. And then finally Rizzo for the Yankees. Still a kind of a weird situation for the Yankees to be in, but he's in a good spot. He's averaging 8.3 a game, and he's had some really good games lately. So he's a little bit boom or bust too, but still think he's a great spot. First base and second base are a little bit limited today, but we have a lot of good. The few guys that we have available all look really solid. For second base, we have Urias for Milwaukee, who can also play third, but I don't think you're going to want to put him there. Is going to have some nice upside against Cincinnati, where he's averaged 9 fantasy points. He hasn't been particularly great the last few games, but he's hitting the ball well enough at 290. He's in a plus matchup now, and this is the type of situation where I love to roster him. Jose Altuve, now he may not end up playing, and if he doesn't, obviously he's not going to be playable, but he's averaging almost 400 the last 10 games, and so if he does play, then he's definitely somebody to take a look at. Gabby Torres for the Yankees has been hitting the ball extremely well, averaging over 15 fantasy points a game, hitting 400 in that span. He had 2 home runs yesterday, but even before that, he's been hitting the ball extremely well as of late. And then finally, Andre Jimenez for the Cleveland, He's in a nice plus matchup, and he's hitting the ball extremely well at 324. He's also just been getting really good solid scoring games lately, so I think he's in a great spot here against the Chicago White Sox. Excuse me. At third base, we have a lot of good options here. We have 2 expensive options in Devers and Jose Ramirez. Both of them are hitting the ball extremely well, and I think either one of them is playable in their particular matchups because with the plus matchups that they have at pitcher. Both of them are averaging over 10 fantasy points a game. Then we'll look at Bregman, who for Houston is playing extremely good. I really like Houston today, and he's obviously pretty expensive, but he's less expensive than the other 2 guys, and he has just as much upside against Baltimore here in this situation. Then we have Josh Donaldson, who's a little bit cheaper, and I almost feel like he's a little too cheap on FanDuel, but he's about the right price here on DraftKings, averaging 10 fantasy points a game. If the Yankees get to Waka, he's definitely going to be one guy that's going to pay off for that. Then we have Austin Riley, who hasn't been hitting the ball quite as well, but he is kind of due for a good game here, and he's been pretty good against Philadelphia this season, and so I think he's got a plus matchup here, though he is pretty expensive. Matt Chapman's another guy I really like here for Toronto. Really like Toronto today. 9.6 last 10 games, including 3 home runs. I think he has home run potential in this game, even though he hasn't been good against Tampa Bay this year. I think it's a situation where he will have a big game. And then finally we have Justin Turner. not in the most ideal matchup, but I still think that he's in a plus situation today. He's averaging 10 fantasy points a game, including 2 home runs. He's just been too good lately to not want to utilize in some capacity. At shortstop, we have O'Neal Cruz, who has been hitting the ball extremely hard. One of the few guys on Pittsburgh that is actually hitting the ball. He's also torched the Chicago Cubs for 11 fantasy points a game so far this season. Obviously, the Pittsburgh isn't been playing good, but he's been one of the exceptions. He's having some big games occasionally, so he's somebody to take a look at in this particular matchup. Chris Morel for Chicago Cubs, excuse me. He's also in a great spot here. He's averaging. He hasn't been hitting the ball well, but he's gone up against terrible pitcher for Pittsburgh, and 2 of the last 3 games he's been getting some fantasy points, and so I think he's about to have a bounce back game. And then Willie Adames, he's one of my favorite plays on the slate. Unfortunately, his price points also come up, but he's averaging 17.7 fantasy points a game at 444 average, and a nice plus matchup here. He's having just some gigantic games lately. I feel like he's somebody you have to take in consideration. Jeremy Pena is finally out of his slump, and it's really paying off for him. He's averaging 9.8 fantasy points a game last 10. Has been a home run threat as well, and I really like him in this matchup. He's really starting to hit the ball extremely well as we round out the season. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa for the Yankees, another guy that if they get to Uwaka, he's going to have a good game. He's averaged almost 7 fantasy points a game last 10, and he's pretty cheap, so that can definitely help you fill in the roster. And then Ahmad Rosario for Cleveland against Chicago. He's averaging 12 fantasy points a game. His price has come up some, but I still think he's in a good play here at 333 batting average, and so I think he's somebody to take in consideration. And the outfielders, we have a couple options that are cheap, and then we have some more expensive options at the bottom of the list here. So we'll start with Robbie Grossman, who's in a plus matchup, and he's been hitting the ball pretty well lately. He's averaging 8.8 fantasy points the last 10 games. Funny how these guys get picked up by the Braves, and then they suddenly start hitting the ball well. As the lineup is just so juicy and it gives you RBI potential and stuff. So I think he's in a pretty good spot as a Hail Mary option. Then we have Andrew McCutchen, excuse me, who hasn't been hitting the ball quite as good as of late, but he's in a plus matchup today, and he's averaging 6.6 fantasy points a game, and this game's at Cincinnati, a team he's really done well against this season. It looks like maybe Cincinnati's changed their pitcher. It's just showcasing, I'm just noticing this on DraftKings now. Let's see who, it was going to be, it looked like Mike Minor. If it's not Mike Minor, that definitely changes the situation up. But anyway, let's go and get through the rest of the players. Christian Yelich is also a guy I really like. This is starting to say Hunter Green, so it just changed on me from what I can tell. Let me check this real quick. Let's see. MLB.com. Sorry about that. This changes up the dynamic here. It doesn't change it a ton, but it does change a little bit. It looks like it is going to be Hunter Green after all. Well, just to give you some update, it really doesn't change what I think about this situation because it's a home game for Green, but he's had 2 really good games, but before that he's been kind of all over the place, and I still think that Milwaukee is a good matchup against him, just said he's not as easy as Mike Minor is. Alright, so let's go ahead and keep going, because it really doesn't change anything, it's just I just had to check it out to make sure that the player's right. Ian Happ is a guy I really like for Chicago Cubs. He's averaging almost 7 fantasy points a game last 10. He's somebody that's been extremely good against Pittsburgh this season, and anytime he comes up to the top of my projections, I really like him. He's also pretty inexpensive today at $4,300. Then we have Kyle Tucker at $5,000. He's averaging 10 fantasy points a game, 4 home runs in the last 10, and I really like Houston in this particular matchup. Then we look at Brian Reynolds. He's one of the only other guys on Pittsburgh that I would consider. He's averaging 8.8 the last 10. He's one of the few guys that are still trying to play for them. And so he is kind of boom or bust, but he's somebody that has some potential in this matchup. Toscar Hernandez is another guy I like for Toronto. He's averaging about 5 fantasy points a game, but he's in a nice plus matchup here, and I think he had a really good game the other day against Philly, and it's just a matter of time before he gets going again. And then George Springer for Toronto is also in a great spot. He's averaging 9 fantasy points a game, 2 home runs the last 10. He's always a home run threat, and he's been more consistent than Toscar has. Stephen Kwan is another guy I like here for Cleveland. He's averaging 11.8 fantasy points a game. He even hit a home run the other day, yesterday, which isn't something he normally does. But he's still been scoring a lot of points because he's getting RBIs and hits and stuff like that. So I think he's a great matchup against Cueto. So overall, I think we have a really solid slate. You could also kind of look at Aaron Judge and Ronald Acuna if you really wanted to. Their prices are super expensive, though, on this particular slate. Same goes for Yordan Alvarez and Giancarlo Stanton. But everybody on this, I think the slate's really good. Obviously, there seems like there's going to be a pitching change here in Cincinnati. But again, that game is at Cincinnati, so it's not somebody that I wouldn't want to roster Green in this particular situation. He's only averaged 13 fantasy points a game for the last 10 games, or for his season, at home this season. And he tends to give up a lot of earned runs, and the Milwaukee Brewers are poised to take advantage of that. So with that said, thank you guys again for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.